You've just cooked a fabulous meal, and as often is the case, your family hasn't eaten more than about half of it. Turned out people weren't hungry that much that evening. And you know what happens with leftovers. It's a delicious meal. You put a lot of effort into it. You don't want to throw it away. And people say, well, we'll eat it tomorrow. But it doesn't happen. Tomorrow, fresh food is cooked, and this dish slowly deteriorates in the fridge over the next 5 days until it's finally admitted by everyone that nobody's going to eat it, and it is thrown away, committed or participating and adding to a statistic that sees roughly 50% of all food in highly developed countries like the United States being thrown away at one stage of the food production and consumption process. Now, this is a delicious dinner, and you know there are people hungry in your town, in perhaps your neighborhood. How do you get this dish with its ingredients for allergy conscious individuals to someone that needs this food within a 1-mile radius efficiently enough that you don't just throw it away and continue throwing away 50% of all food while people starve? You have been rejected too many times recently on a dating app. You're lonely, you want to connect with someone, you're isolated, but you're doing a lot of the outreach. And there's just been too many disappointing, somewhat critical, some people not showing up, some people being rude, not following up. And as much as you want a good relationship, you don't want to go through that process one more time. So you're stuck. There's a 90% statistical odd if you go out on another date. That's what's happening 90% of the time. So you're stuck. What do? How do you find another person in your city who's having the same exact problem and wants to talk about it, wants to form a new friendship? How do you avoid a problem that's so painful that it's basically leading to statistically higher levels of isolation because no one's found a solution to reach out with the higher odds of success? You want to connect more with people in your neighborhood in the late afternoons to early evenings. You have approached a few people in the roughly 100 houses in your neighborhood, but they've all seemed a bit impatient, a bit surprised, like, what are you doing knocking at my door? I'm busy, right? And so you don't want to be a problem, and so you give up. You don't proceed and knock on the other 100 doors. Now, at the end of the street, there's another person who had the same experience, the same desire, wanting to connect more with neighbors in the late afternoons. That was 4 or 5 years ago. And they had the same experience of knocking on a few neighbors' doors, getting the sense that it would be more of a burden than a welcome opportunity to socialize. How do those two people connect when they're only 100 houses apart, but may never meet in the current framework of communication? Your landlord is harassing you in a way that is reducing the quality of your life 50%. You know it's upsetting, but you don't want to move at that particular moment. how do you find out in a few minutes what laws do and do not apply to your lease and your property, or what options you have to hold the landlord legally accountable? This is particularly important with lower income situations where someone cannot hire an attorney, which, there's often money involved in landlord-tenant disputes, and so if the problem is money, having to go pay someone hundreds of dollars an hour is not necessarily an effective solution. So next scenario, you have a bicycle sitting in the garage, that's me, that has not been used in 5 years. You don't want to throw it away or go online, and you don't just want to just give it away to anyone who doesn't care. But if you could be sure that this would make a real difference in someone's life, maybe someone who couldn't afford a bicycle or a homeless person who would take care of it, you would very happily put it outside the garage and be delighted that it was being used. Now, how do you connect with that person efficiently and easily, such that you can take a photo of the bike, describe its condition as perfect running order, needs some work, or go into that, show its geolocation using GPS, and send that out to people who have put out that they would really like a bike and don't have the funds to purchase one right now. And then that the first person who clicked "I'll be there in an hour" automatically disables the ad so that everyone else knows it's claimed, no one wastes their time, and you can, much like an Uber driver, watch the person making their way to your garage, and there they are with the bike, and can affirm that they are now the new owner of the bicycle. You want to borrow a tool you will only use once every few years, but you feel a bit embarrassed to walk the neighborhood of strangers asking, "Do you have this tool? And if so, can I borrow it?" So you go out and spend $150 on this tool that now takes up space and probably gets used a total of 20 minutes in a 5-year period. But you didn't want to drive 20 minutes to a rental unit and pay all the insurance, etc., and then have to return it at a set period. So you just start accumulating stuff. How do you let your neighbors know that this tool is available for delivery? And how do you know which of your neighbors take good care of their tools and which don't? You're talking with someone on the phone to get a price for repairing the rotten boards in your fence. What you don't know is that the same person that you're talking to likes to go bowling every Thursday, and you're looking for a bowling buddy and are perfectly free on Thursday nights. How do either of you find out that while you may or may not be compatible as client and contractor, you would be best buddies bowling for many years if only you knew you had that interest? How do you get that information efficiently to pop to the surface? You're 45 years old, white, living in the US, with a diet of soda, pasta, pizza, salad, and cereal most days. You've noticed over the last 3 years you've gotten tireder. You're not even sure if it might be bordering on what could be diagnosed as depression. You're not enjoying life as much. But nothing jumps out at you as being particularly odd, and you don't know where to start. How do you go about finding out what is the most likely choice that you can make to dramatically improve your well-being that might just take 2% to 10% of your time, or a 2 to 10% shift in how you spent your money. How do you discover what's working for other people anywhere around the world that are like you, that are in your situation? And I'd like to suggest that every single one of these scenarios, I either know someone or personally encounter. When I wanted to become carbon neutral, I couldn't find out exactly. Nobody knew exactly how much carbon I was producing with my lifestyle, because nobody fully knew what my lifestyle was. I might see so-and-so at the cafe. They don't know how many times I fly overseas. They don't know which jet engines produce what amount of CO2 in this airline versus this other airline. So, how do I become a carbon positive individual? Well, it took about an hour, some extrapolation, some guesswork. And as far as I could tell, planting about 500 trees would do the job. So I paid for 500 trees to be planted. I don't know what trees they are. I don't know where they're growing. I don't get to watch them maturing into beautiful trees. I don't know if they're dead next year. I just know that I paid $500 to plant 500 trees based on a lot of extrapolation, based on a lot of hypotheticals. And how much more satisfying would it be to know that this variety produced more oxygen than this variety, that this company has a 95% life rate for every tree it's planted versus a 30% life rate when you're planting little seedlings out in the wild without irrigation. You could easily be in a scenario where 90% of the trees planted are dead, in which case I'd need to plant thousands of trees to actually be carbon positive. I don't know any of that, and there's no way for me to find out. I tried to give a jacket to, in fact, I had 4 extra jackets. I saw a lot of homeless people in my town. I asked several shelters, how could I get these jackets to people who actually need them? They had no idea. How do I get this food to people who need them? How do I find out if I want to have a positive impact on someone else's life somewhere in the world? What is the single most efficient way to make that difference? And with a few swipes of my finger, how do I get that money or that energy or that item or that information into the people's hands and get the feedback that it's working or it's not working? How do I know that information? Now, the big question is, who at the present time knows any of this about you? Now, I talk with people all the time and confirm that there is not a single person on the planet who knows the majority of useful information relative to their well-being, because we're largely invisible from one another. I may meet you at a luncheon and have no idea that you're struggling with heroin addiction. It just didn't come up, or it was politically incorrect to talk about. But this information must be available and utilized in order to release an exponential return on energy in the form of sustainable human well-being. Something or someone must connect the dots, or 90% of our potential of our possibility field as a species will not be realized. Now, given the slowness of speech and the exponential speed of computing, see, computing happens faster than the speed of thought. Speech happens at about 1/100th the speed of thought. So it makes sense for a computer, an algorithm, to sift and sort with feedback, to have the information with an agenda of creating sustainable, measurable human well-being that is sustained and measured by the people experiencing the result. If a computer represents or recommends a particular individual to engage with in this way based on what it knows about us, and it's a disaster, the algorithm needs to know why, so that a better recommendation can be made, not only for ourselves, but so that there's a learning process. Now, we have AI with AlphaGo, beating the best Go player on the planet repeatedly. And they analyze millions of games and millions of possible games in order to recommend the behavior that has the highest probability of success. And because they did that successfully, they beat the best Go player, Chinese chess, in the world. And that is a beginning on an exponential development cycle of connecting the dots faster, more symmetrically, more consistently than any human is capable of doing. That is a growing exponential technology. Now the question is, when information is more valuable, meaning a number of economists have concluded that the value of all the information in the world about individuals, etc., for marketing and other purposes is now more valuable than oil. Information is a $1 trillion economy. But in a capitalist and sociopathic paradigm, meaning operating from the reptilian brain of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, this information is viewed for its exploitative, manipulative, advertising value. That's what gives it its value. I can manipulate people to spend their time online or whatever doing stuff that's of no value to them more effectively if I know that these little hooks about them capture their attention. If I know they're an insomniac because they can't sleep from 10 p.m. till 4 in the morning, I can target at this point when they're in an addictive cycle, and I can get more of what's good for my employer, for me, at their expense. In a sociopathic paradigm where information is being purchased for the benefit of the purchaser, information is dangerous. Transparency and vulnerability is dangerous. The same information, however, is the most potent technology for accelerating exponential well-being when it is used in the question, how can we create the most well-being for this individual and this individual, for every single individual in the system, by orchestrating a pattern of behavior between individuals that synergistically leads to more sustainable and intelligent well-being than any other pattern of action available. How do we harness and fuel that algorithm with the information it needs to help us be our best selves, to win, to grow, to achieve our goals, to partner? How do we do it? And the answer comes in the form of trust. Now, our governments, if you read the Vault 7 WikiLeaks folder, our governments are fear-based, corrupt, illegal institutions in multiple instances. And people will not share this information with most of the governments in the world for good reason. How do you trust your corporation when your emails are being scanned by Google to sell you garbage bags if you have a dead body to dispose of, as in one unfortunate correlation? Mention a dead body, maybe you need some garbage bags. Now, how do you trust an organization that is political, that is biased, that's out to make as much money for its advertisers, not the people using the free service who are the customer and the product? Google offers up knowledge about specific customers and charges businesses to manipulate those people into buying things, whether they are in the best interest of those individuals or not. And that's the model. So how do you transcend that model and generate trust? How do you get individuals to choose freely and intelligently to tell a phone, to tell a computer more information about themselves than 90% of couples talk about? They don't ask and they don't tell. I once gave a 400-page book called Into Me You See. It's something I wrote for a possible partner, to my closest partner, the woman who had known me more than any other person in my entire life, where we'd spent 60% of our time together for over 4 years. And she read this book, and I asked her what percentage of information in the book about me she had no idea about until she read the book. Now, she said 30%. Now, my assessment, if she's the closest person I've ever spent time with and the one who's known me more than any other person in my lifetime, this is not personal. Most of the people in our lives know very little about vast arenas of who we are. And the social protocol of what is and is not talked about will sustain that pattern indefinitely. So if that's happening to the statistical majority, that even our own partners and wives know little or nothing about large areas of our lives, how do you connect effectively? And who are you going to trust with that information? I believe that a nonprofit with high levels of decentralized encryption, with zero agenda of doing any other thing other than increasing your well-being by adapting to your feedback. Meaning that if the app sends you an alert and it's irritating rather than helpful, and you say, irritating, don't do that again, it stops doing it. And if it's helpful and you say, very helpful, 1 to 10, this was 10 out of 10 helpful, it gives you some more suggestions. Because it has, and the nonprofit has, no other agenda than to bring as much sustainable well-being as possible, to as many people as possible for no other reason than because it's fun. It's fun to bring joy and well-being to other people. It's fun to be around happy people. It's fun to participate in an engagement that leads to mutual increase in well-being. And I would suggest that the way that the most valuable pool of information on the planet will be generated and utilized to release the possibility field on the planet that we can only dream about in the state of unconscious ignorance and fragmented isolation that we exist in today. We're not functioning as a species, in other words. We're not even functioning as a country or as a neighborhood. How can you function as a neighborhood when you know little or nothing about most of the people in it? So, deeply encrypted, decentralized blockchain technology, metadata that's gathered that is not hackable out of one's device. Metadata can be used to connect individuals in ways that has never occurred in the history of humanity. And all of the things that I talked about with a well-deployed and utilized app, accessible from any computer via website, accessible from any phone on the planet, it will be fed the information that makes it so powerful for one reason only. That information is used demonstrably and regularly to increase the well-being of the individual. And this is the core protocol. In order to access a circle and a sphere of statistical data, you need to be a participant. No observers, only participants. So if you're using the area in the app about 10xing your marriage, and you want to find out what's the most irritating 3 things that you do in your partner's eyes, it's simple. You fill out the most irritating thing your partner does in your eyes. And when you've both filled out that information, it's shared. Now you learn something valuable and you share something valuable, and you both are a little bit more conscious. And consciousness is a step towards attunement, which is a step towards success and partnering and well-being. So if you want to know how other white 45 males in California are feeling about the lockdown, it's simple. You answer the question, how are you feeling about the lockdown? You click submit. Your personal profile, etc., if you'd like, is private. But the metadata of how many people of this demographic and this demographic and this demographic and this age group and this age group is presented as metadata. 75% of you all agree on this, 2% of you feel this, and this is the demographic that is having this experience. Now you know something you could not know in any other way within seconds by contributing to the data pool. So the data pool becomes more and more accurate, more and more valuable the more people participate. And the more people participate, the more accurate and valuable it becomes, and the more desirable and essential it is to access the database. Because if you've watched the muddle around the world with, for example, coronavirus, the authorities were days, weeks, or months behind in announcing stuff that could have been dealt with 6 months ago. Meaning there were people being diagnosed, there were people who knew, etc., all around the world. Starting, I think, in August or September of 2019. But the public was left in the dark by their officials, etc., until varying points in the winter and spring, costing lives and necessitating trillions of dollars of economic impact that would not be there with more accurate and timely data. Now, almost everyone in the media domain has an agenda and a spin factor to insert that agenda paired with data selectively chosen. That cannot be done with metadata. You cannot fudge the fact that 98% of the app users, Republican or Democratic, agreed with this, or that this is what has happened, or you cannot fudge the numbers that say that 4 million Americans have declared themselves, through metadata, obviously, for privacy, as incest survivors, and that in only 1% of the case was the parent confronted by any outside authority in any helpful way. Well, that gives you accurate data to respond. We need data unfiltered by politics in a statistical format of metadata. And the only way that we're going to generate that is if every time we enter data about ourselves, it is used for our well-being, it is used with the encryption protection and turned into metadata. So rather than saying, Dane Rose at 232 Bungalow in this city, etc., does this, it says 50% of all people who have filled out this questionnaire in this app say this. And as that data, floods in, those statistics change, etc., until you get a more and more relevant data sampling. But once there is connectivity around the world, any important question can be sent out to a relevant subgroup, and you can find out within seconds or within days how many Chinese Americans being blamed for coronavirus are afraid for their lives today. How high is that fear on a 1 to 10 scale? Now, if you've learned that it's 80% are at a 7 and brimming over, and then you can click on what do they want to change. Well, then when you're interacting with someone in that demographic, you can make that change. And you know what you're doing and why you're doing it based on data supplied by them, not supplied by some political agenda. Once an individual has experienced that the few seconds it takes to answer a question honestly and accurately results in no negative consequences, to be honest and to be transparent, and results in access to data that leads to many positive consequences and self-awareness, there is a virtuous cycle of increased participation that exponentially grows the most valuable pool of data in the world, specifically for the benefit and intention of those who use it. And in doing so, this can become the most valued and thus the most valuable platform for creating, sharing, and synergizing information on the planet or that the species has ever seen.